With this session update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. The February budget and economic forecast projected slower growth. In response, Governor Walz issued his revised state budget for the 2020-21 biennium. In making adjustments to the latest forecast, the Walz administration has proposed spending reductions of $131 million across state agencies, tax adjustments that would save $65 million, and a return of the $142 million left unspent in the reinsurance fund to the general fund. Governor Walz has also proposed $37 million in new investments, including $25 million more for higher education and another $1.1 million to the Minnesota licensing and registration system. He outlined his revised budget to the press and took questions. Here's that press conference.
It's that whole lost productivity argument during this time of the year with the basketball. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for coming over. Our original budget made smart investments in Minnesota's future, focusing on the core tenets of education, healthcare, and community prosperity. This revised budget we're releasing today takes into account the February economic forecast, which projected a $500 million less than the previous forecast. The original budget priorities remain intact. Expecting this lower economic forecast, we were fiscally cautious and prudent and left an unprecedented $789 million on the bottom line in the first year of the biennium. We were correct in doing this. That was confirmed yesterday by some of the moves of the Federal Reserve and some of the economic indicators. But all of our core investments stay in place. This revised investment, we met with the state economist to look at what growth indicators needed to be there and what programs that we were advocating for that would continue to grow Minnesota's economy, build that workforce we needed, and lift up quality of life. We went through this line by line to maintain the balanced budget and have left, as you see, $562 million on the bottom line to put us in strong fiscal shape and maintain budgetary balance. We started out strong, smart, and investing in one Minnesota. We made tough choices, and at the end, we are also in a fiscally solid place for a one Minnesota. At this time, I'd like to invite Commissioner Franz up to go through some of the details. I will come back, and then we can answer some questions. Commissioner?
Thank you, Governor. Good morning. My name is Myron Franz, Commissioner of Minnesota Management Budget. A copy of this poster has been handed out. We have a document summarizing the 4 key management priorities that's been made available, and we also have a description of the governor's priorities that have remained unchanged. You'll see on our website more detailed information that you can get. As the governor made it clear, it was a $789 million at the upper left-hand corner of that chart is where we started and what's really important. The $789 million number is important, and so is the reason that we left it there as a starting point. When creating our original budget, Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan made deliberate decisions to be cautious and leave money on the bottom line to account for forecast risk. This is an important component of maintaining fair and balanced budgets. Our revised budget today continues this approach. We had a lot of work to accomplish since February 28th when the February forecast came out. First, we repriced the governor's proposal based upon new economic and budget data. Then we proceeded line by line, as the governor said, to fine-tune the budget. We balanced our budget and invested in Minnesota through 4 budget actions that you see on this board. Our revised budget proposal maintains a balanced budget for this biennium, leaving $562 million on the bottom line for fiscal years 20 and 21. I must note that our constitutional duty requires a balanced budget for the upcoming biennium, fiscal years 2020 and 2021. But there is no requirement for the following years, planning years as we refer to them, 2022 and 2023. But we followed the standard of maintaining fiscal discipline for the following biennium too. Thus, the balance of $562 million is available to roll forward into fiscal years 22 and 23. Leaving a positive balance in those out years. This is a new fiscal discipline model that we're following. Over the last 8 years, you saw Governor Dayton follow this model, planning not only for the immediate biennium, but for the next, and that's exactly what we're doing here. And by doing this, you focus on providing a $2.4 billion rainy day fund, you get a AAA credit rating, and you lessen the impact of future disruptions in the economy by having balanced budgets for the next biennium and for the one after that. At the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that the $789 million in 20 and 21 was reduced to $261 million after the February forecast after repricing and after the governor signed into law 2 bills passed by the legislature. You can now see that after the changes from the February forecast, the bottom line was reduced to $261 million. This meant we needed to make some changes. After a careful analysis of the budget options, we determined that budget adjustments needed to leave $562 million on the bottom line for 20 and 21 in order to achieve a positive balance in 22 and 23. So let's go through the chart quickly. You see the first area is spending reductions, $131 million. First, we reduced our overall spending by $131 million. We reviewed the budget line by line. We reduced our budget proposals by $98 million while still protecting the governor's priorities in education, healthcare, and community prosperity. We made reductions to nearly every cabinet agency. We revised our budget to reduce state spending because of we also had a proposal to increase the federal share of some of the substance use disorder investment treatment options, so we were able to expand the opportunity for the federal government to provide more funding in that area by making some changes in our law. Our budget also directs about $17 million in expenditures out of the general fund to other funding sources, including equity grants at DEED, assessments for the State Energy Office, and $4.2 million for the Healthcare Access Fund as part of a proposal to revise pharmacy payment methodology to more accurately reflect cost. Next, we made changes in the tax bill of $65 million. We were able to raise additional $65 million by first conforming the IRS Section 179 expensing provision, but we included the 80% add back for 2018 only. What this does is it saves $49 million in 20 and 21, but allows the full Section 179 expensing in the next biennium for 19 and 20 and going forward. We also closed $16 million in corporate loopholes. First, these changes bring fairness across businesses by ending preferential treatment for complex financial instruments like derivatives, for debt finance stock, and for especially organized mutual funds. Second, fairness requires restricting tax-motivated transactions that have no business purpose and are only designed to avoid tax. We modify the new sales tax exemption for local governments and nonprofits by limiting this new exemption to only 20 and 21. In the unspent reinsurance area of $142 million, in 2017, when the reinsurance program was created, there was uncertainty around the cost and the size of the individual market and whether we would receive federal funding. So the legislature appropriated $142 million from the general fund in addition to an appropriation from the Healthcare Access Fund. After passage of the bill, the money from the general fund was not necessary. In our revised budget, we returned $142 million in unspent reinsurance funds to the general fund. And we did make some new investments, $37 million. To support the governor's education priorities, we increased investments in higher education by an additional $12 million for the University of Minnesota, for a total investment of $51 million, and we increased our investment to Minnesota State by $13 million, for a total investment of $65 million. We increased our investment to the Tribal Child Welfare Initiative by expanding our commitments to $6.4 million for 20 and 21. And while reviewing our original budget line by line, we used this opportunity to make technical adjustments and some strategic investments to additional areas. For example, we responded to the Office of Legislative Auditor report on child care fraud, so we're investing an additional $2.1 million on strengthening the oversight of the state child care assistance program. In total, these changes resulted in $37 million in new investments. So after making these changes, our revised budget leaves $562 million on the bottom line. The revised budget is balanced and is fiscally sound. Our revised budget continues to invest in education, health care, and community prosperity, and provides a positive balance for 22 and 23. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We had to look hard at the things that impacted this budget, both fiscally, but as we have said from the beginning, the Lieutenant Governor and I believe Minnesotans believe, a budget is also a moral document. So our core tenets, as we said, remain intact for education, healthcare, and community prosperity. We did not waver in our investments to education. This budget maintains historic investments in E-12 education, making sure that every child receives that high-quality education, black, white, brown, or indigenous, and no matter what their zip code is. Those are the types of investments that ensure that workforce, that make sure that Minnesota has the capacity for the continued economic growth and the quality of life we've come to expect. We continue to fund the policy changes we need to ensure that every Minnesotan has access to affordable quality health care, and we start tackling the front-end drivers of this by wellness being a piece of what we do. We make strides to make sure every community thrives across Minnesota by expanding access to good quality child care with the accountability pieces in place and housing that's affordable, investing in infrastructure and broadband, and providing state and local government aid and county program aid. And we did that after taking half $500 million off the bottom line. We're able to make those hard choices today by cutting things that we believe in or scaling back on them. And I just, before I take questions, want to be clear. I believe very strongly that the governor's office and the capacity we could do to outreach and give a better voice here, we will continue to do that. But I had made a proposal to increase the governor's budget in the executive branch, and these types of hard decisions have to start with me, so we zeroed out the governor's budget request. We will continue to do that work. We will find, as we ask all the agencies to do, and we ask all Minnesotans to do, to be more creative and more innovative while not falling into the trap that austerity is the thing that leads us to a better future. It is not. Smart, fiscally sound investments are the things that leads Minnesota to that better one Minnesota, and that's what we did. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions. We can do budget questions first, and then if you would, we could do the any other questions afterwards.
Governor, you have drawn even sharper battle lines now with Republicans over the issue of reinsurance and how to handle health care. Would you just talk a little bit about your strategy?
Yeah, I think so. And I think putting this back isn't necessarily the battle on reinsurance. It's just fiscally sound. Because, again, when reinsurance was done, I think the commissioner made the case, and I don't think any of us disagree. In a time of triage, we slapped a tourniquet on the individual market. And to be very honest, the reason that money's sitting in there, no one had any idea what it would cost or what they would get for it. That's not a real smart way to approach the problem. And all this does is return that back. I don't think it changes anything that we know that discussion and that debate is ongoing. It just starts from a fairer position that this was not money saved. It was money that we just had no idea and shot for the moon a little bit, and this came back. Now and our proposal, of course, I think, as the premium subsidies, is much more targeted, smarter, and also lets us leverage $90.2 million of federal money that you don't get with reinsurance. So it doesn't change, I think, the overall debate. It certainly doesn't change my position that we've had several years now to come up with a much smarter, more targeted way to approach this, and reinsurance isn't that way, and we'll go from there.
Governor, what were some of the hardest changes and revisions to make?
Yeah, the question is really good because, again, that's what should be asked of this. We came back, we anticipated there might be some of that. I did not put anything in this budget as a wish list, and I think the Lieutenant Governor, I, and this entire team were very thoughtful on how pieces work together, so it kind of felt like when you took something out, you were weakening some of the other. And so I think those, again, not just because it's personal, I thought we started with our office. Those were things I believed in, a new way of kind of approaching how the executive office does outreach to make things happen. There was a piece in there, just for example, that it's a scaling piece, and I want to be clear about this. Many things we did, we kept in place, but we talked about scaling. We looked as when the economy, we get a bump, we make this smart, we get the investments, we can do more. But something I was passionate about, it's all of these things that may seem small in a budget, but DNR trails. I passed the National Trails Act with Cynthia Loomis, a Republican from Wyoming, that was bipartisan. We have that in there, but we had to scale that back a little bit. So in each one of these agencies, hard to go to the agencies, to the Secretary of State's office or to the Attorney General's office of things they're trying to do to protect consumers but being smart. I think we struck the balance, though, in spreading this out amongst all the agencies. There were a few things that did not take a cut. Housing did not take a cut because in the headlines and your stories yesterday was homelessness on the rise. We will achieve our veterans homelessness goal by the end of the year, but this is an issue that extends across all economic levels. And we did not make cuts to veterans burials or to military bonuses at a time when recruiting, Minnesota is one of the few states that's meeting recruiting goals in the national security piece of our National Guard. Those were about the three pieces that stayed in place. So they were all really difficult. I think trying to separate them out, we really started to find out how hard it was when each one of these things impacted something else.
Governor, this budget still assumes that the medical provider tax will survive in some form?
It does. It does. It assumes that the smart policies, bipartisan policies of 27 years that provides health care to 1.1 million Americans while lowering health care costs and ensuring stability in our rural providers stays in place. With no plan to much do anything else, it seems to me that the allowing the sunset to happen is much more ideological than it is practical. So we assume, like Minnesotans and the Hospital Association and most major groups who have been up here, assume that we need to do what we've done wisely for 27 years. And I'll make my case about this. Minnesota's capacity to have more people insured, Minnesota's capacity to have better health outcomes is not by luck. It is by that well thought out policy instituted by a Republican governor, and our intention is to keep it in place.
So after the proposed reductions, the money that you're shuffling in from other funds, and the money that's kind of seemingly coming off the bottom line to a degree, is this budget bigger than your previous one? Is it less?
5%. It's a 5% cut from us.
What's the total? No, what's the total budget? It was 49.47 something before. What will it be this year passed?
The new number will be, I don't know if I have that on here, Britta, do I? Is Britta right down here? I think I've got the number. It's 49, I believe it's 49.4 billion.
So
Came down.
$70 million is the net reduction.
About 100 billion net reduction overall. Gives about almost 49.5 billion.
10% of the spending reductions here come from public safety judiciary. Does that affect the projected hires for prison guards, or if not there, where are those cuts coming from?
No, and I don't think it's 10% is the number on that, but there is everybody, as I said, with the exception of housing, Veterans Affairs, and military, the judiciary piece, we fully funded all of their requests. There was a request for a 3.5% increase to judicial salaries. We moved that down to 3%. That is not the corrections pieces. Those cuts did not come. The corrections pieces did not impact the number of guards nor the capital requests for safety in the corrections system.
Governor, there's a housing advocates who's talking about housing. Housing advocates yesterday had a hearing about the tax credit bill. $25 million is the value. It would have a 100% tax credit for donations to housing. Your Department of Revenue appeared to oppose that bill yesterday, and I wondered what your position was and why they would oppose that.
I don't know. I'll follow up on that one. If I did not see the hearing results of where they were at, but we'll follow up with you, Peter, to see where it is.
Let me give the actual number just to make sure it's clear. So the original total spending was 49.472 billion. The new one is 49.351 billion, $121 million reduction.
Thank you. We'll follow up with you, Peter, to get you that.
Governor, the corporate tax changes, albeit not very large, they're not the direction that the Republicans will want you to go. So can you talk a little bit about your justification for that?
Yeah. If it's not zero corporate tax, they're probably going to be unhappy with me. I understand that. I was with the business partnership yesterday. We forecasted a little bit for them to talk about where we were going. These are really just, I think, fairness issues, as Commissioner Franz talked about, of closing some of those loopholes. And again, I've been very clear about this. I am appreciative of the strong business and corporate culture that's in Minnesota. I think the philanthropy that comes out of it, as well as the job creations. So this isn't a poke in the eye. This is a conformity and a fairness that I believe the 2017 federal tax code and the 21% straight up cuts that corporations got, they got a pretty good deal in that. Most working class people did not, and so that's why we still provide about $400 million in cuts to middle class and lower income people in this, and some of that is by not giving. I think there was an assumption because they cut 21%, I think we had a different definition of conformity, that they assumed they were going to get another 21% in Minnesota. We certainly are not going to do that. We certainly know that that economic model is a recipe for disaster, and we simply don't have the luxury that they had in Congress of passing that we could go from about 191 billion of yearly deficit to 1 trillion directly attributed to these unpaid for tax cuts. So it's small on the edge, but they were things that needed to be closed.
Governor, I think they would like to say, given the job losses that were reported yesterday for Minnesota, they will question the wisdom of reducing what's left on the bottom line, as well as these corporate tax cuts.
The cause and effect, how they see economics really is something to me, because they assume that the numbers we provided them on the fourth tier tax brackets of growing in Minnesota, you can't look at it month to month, you have to look at it yearly, but apparently on this, we knew, and when we budgeted, we knew the economic forecast was slowing. The tax cuts did not have the long-lasting impact. The sugar high was over. What we were basically seeing was stock buybacks. We were not seeing middle-class incomes raised, and we weren't seeing a lot of hiring. We knew that with the cold weather, we would see a job contraction. That's why our budget does exactly what you need to do, and why I spoke with the state economist, who is available to speak with the Republican legislators. At this time more than ever, one of the best things we can do is one of the strongest job programs that's probably ever been proposed in Minnesota is our transportation package that will be the firewall against any slowing of the economy and job creation. So we think now is exactly the right time. There's a philosophy of austerity when you start to see a blip in this, but you can't have it both ways. Which is it? Is President Trump's policies growing the economy massively, or are they creating a loss in jobs? What we recognize is that this is a slowing growth. It is not recessionary. Minnesota needs to not pull back on the investments that created the strength in our economy, and that's what this budget does while leaving money on the bottom line.
Governor, under the heading of new investments, there's $2.1 million to strengthen oversight of child care assistance, and then $1.1 million, an additional increase to MNLARS. Can you go through both of those?
Yes, and both of them are for to make sure we're able to implement. On the child care assistance program, first of all, I want to reiterate, this two-generation strategy and the ability to be able to get this quality care is absolutely essential to the foundations for children and family, those working children and family, to move forward. This is a program that, when administered correctly, makes a huge difference and actually returns money to us. What we do know is we accept the findings of the legislative auditor in that there was a weakness in the oversight, and this is making sure that we have those capacity, and this is some folks that we're putting on the ground that have to go out and do these inspections, not yearly, not with the paperwork. Same thing with MNLARS. We're starting to see the program, I think, knock on wood, since we released 1.15. We saw the rollout of that improve the system. We saw it improve the workarounds for the deputy registers. The times to be able to process these transactions is coming down. And what this is to be able to beef up what we put in this last emergency appropriation. So,
Governor, with your new starting point being this budget, and you've had conversations publicly that the Republicans have only had a hard no for you on every turn. How do you envision that this change in your budget will move things forward? And if you compare it back to your time in Washington, are the Republicans acting as obstructionists, or are they actually going to be partners in trying to come to a solution?
I'm still hopeful, and I think it's important, and I just want to state that I want to go out and talk to people about this. My intention is not to go out and push these legislators into a certain direction. It's to go out and make the case. Their constituents are my constituents. I do believe that there's going to have to be compromise, and my position has not changed on that. Some of my, I guess, aggressiveness in getting out there is, at some point you're going to have to move a little bit. This zero, no, the hill we're going to die on is nothing on transportation. It's got to come out of the general fund, is a recipe for disaster. It's what got Ohio. I refer them to Republican Governor Mike DeWine's 89-page that says using the general fund and bonding created a crisis situation in the Ohio budget. And 2 days ago, I asked them, and this is where I'm going to stay optimistic on this, but at some point in time, no and doing nothing, they are on an island on the issue of transportation, to the point that on Wednesday, the Wall Street Journal had a story headlined, "Finally, a big idea with bipartisan support, the gas tax." And the president of the National Chamber of Commerce, Tom Donahue, came out and advocated for a 25-cent increase to the national gas tax. I'll leave it at there for you, that I want to talk on this. This budget, I think, again, I cut 5% of the things that I wanted to invest in that needed to be done. They took offense that I wanted to give some more capacity to the governor's office. I'm negotiating with myself, and I'm just going to go ahead and set it. My negotiation was I zeroed out my request for myself. And I will just give that right off the top. I think what I was proposing was smart. It was good. It would have been responsive to Minnesota. But I want to show at some point in time, I need something to come my way. So, Sean, in response to your question is I hope this shows them that yes, I'm willing to take things off. They haven't even had to put out their budget yet, and I've already cut back on what I needed to. I'm open to that, but I also need some help.
You're talking about cutting back, but I see here higher education, an additional $25 million. Can you talk about the rationale for more money for higher education?
Yeah, and we went on a tour, the Lieutenant Governor and myself. We traveled the entire state, and it was education, but it was higher ed. We're concerned, like all Minnesotans are, and I've got a senior in high school looking at this. There's the cost and the tuition cost and the inflation costs that outpace normal inflation, and I'm trying to get a handle on how to give families the capacity to be able to make some of these decisions. And as you know, we beefed up state grant programs pretty heavily. Those are very popular. We had great feedback, but we also got feedback across this state, and I'll give it this, that the University of Minnesota and the Chancellor at the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities did an incredible job at each of these institutions of coming to us with hard numbers, real stories, people who work there, and students to make the case. And to be quite honestly, we went back and said that they're right. We need to make some adjustments to this. We need to, and we see the value in this, and adjusted the budget accordingly. I think in a situation where you got a new administration coming in, you've got a short window of opportunity to deal with this. There's going to be some things that we've said all along. We're open to listening, adjusting. This is kind of what I'd like, and I think it's hopefully gets there. This is what the legislature is supposed to be doing. Governor, would you take a look at this? Would you be willing to hear this? Would you be willing to see how you could make this work? And to be honest, our families, our students, and our educators across Minnesota, convinced me that we needed to change this to make sure that this was accessible, holding costs down and giving students the choice of education.
Governor, just to be clear, Governor, when you have a press release that says spending reductions, you're talking about reductions in proposed new spending.
That's correct. That's correct.
About cutting from the existing.
No, because we disagree with the austerity philosophy. I did not propose anything that in the long run doesn't make Minnesota stronger and in the long run doesn't end up increasing economic activity by reducing burdens. Again, if I cut on some of my initiatives in housing, there'll be a governor here years down the road that'll be trying to figure out how can we possibly continue to pay for incarceration rates that are out the roof. So, but we scaled those back, and again, I think my initial proposal was thought out. It wasn't pie in the sky. I think many of you said it was bold in what it did. It's a time to be bold. It's a time for Minnesota to decide if we're going to be the state that we know we can be, if we're going to be prepared to innovate, and if we're going to be prepared to allow people to have that high quality of life.
If I may go back to higher ed for just a second. Given the increases, the additional increases over your original budget, would you expect tuition freezes as a
Well, I would certainly hope that this is going to be able to be there. I can tell you that this is a deep relationship and one that is growing with me. It's no secret that my area of personal expertise is more in the E12. The Lieutenant Governor's is more in the pre-K and the children's area. And for us, I think it's getting out there. I certainly hope so, because I think the initial budget, the difference in the initial budget and this is we wanted to see more concern being shown for the cost and for families' choice to be out there. And it wasn't a condemnation towards the system. It was a expectation that we need to show Minnesotans what we're doing to keep tuition down and still provide those services. I think our intention is to continue to grow the way we talk about metrics and dashboards in all of our agencies to show where this money's spending, because I will go back to the situation with the legislative auditor's report on both MNLARS and CCAP. There should be yellow flashing lights before there's red flashing lights, and we need to be able, just like, I'm talking with the business partnership, it's a little different because we don't have the same goal at the end, but we need to be fail fast and correct course quickly. And I reject this notion that this is, like a giant battleship and it's too hard to turn. Cultures can change relatively quickly, and transparency. So
Governor, back on the point of reinsurance, the people who want this program to continue are warning that premiums will expand quickly if it's not kept in place. You don't buy that?
No, I mean, before we even, months ago, when we proposed doing something different, it was fascinating to me how quickly the insurance company said, well, this will be a 50% increase. They don't have a really great track record for predicting these things, and I got to be very honest with you, I think it was pretty inappropriate for them before the plan was laid out. I think what we see is a whole lot of sky is falling and that type of thing coming out. I think we put to rest yesterday, I hope, this idea that higher income Minnesotans are fleeing. There's no evidence to support that. There is no evidence to support on this that it does that. Again, what I'm proposing is cutting out the middleman, returning the tax subsidy to the individuals to make a choice while leveraging $90.2 million as a cost savings to the state of Minnesota. By going to reinsurance, we lose $90.2 million right off the bat. And then we hand it over to the insurance companies who tell us if you don't do this, it's going to go up 50%. They have never been able to tell me if you do this, it's going to go down 50%. It's still always really murky. We think we'll get some premium, stabilization, but we can't be sure. This is not a well thought out plan. It is not the way it should be. And I am just baffled by fiscal conservatives who think the role is to just hand the money to the entity and have them make the decision. Keeping in mind, their mantra is, let Minnesotans make their decisions on this. That's exactly what we're doing with our plan, rather than giving it to the insurance companies and let them decide where it's best to go.
So to be clear, is this closing the door to it, or are you just saying not now? Are you closing the door to another reinsurance extension, or are you saying?
Again, I'll do my thing, and I hope all of you are saying this. I am meeting people halfway. Let's talk about it. Let's see where it's at. But at some point in time, if I'm saying let's see where reinsurance is at, I want to hear back, okay, let's see what we can do on transportation to meet you halfway. It has been no, 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 no. So I'm not closing the door. I think that's disingenuous at this point in time. I think it's a pretty high bar for them to prove to me and get over this, but let them bring it.
On the CCAP piece, the bill that, there was an amendment yesterday to Representative Pinto's bill that includes about $4 million of oversight, hiring in different capacities. Will this require him to scale back those expectations?
No, and they're an independent branch of government. This is the way the system should work. We think that they're, again, with this legislative audit report relatively new, we're kind of looking directly for them. If there's some ideas out there that can even make this better and we need to look at it, we're certainly open to that, to see where the security and the oversight and the confidence for the people of Minnesota, because Minnesotans know, and we're caring people, we know we're smart about this program, but I want to be clear that the legislative audit report gave us a clear path. It told us that we could do better, and just like Minlars, I now own that, and I own the fix for that. But I do want to be clear, before we take some other questions on this, that what needs to stop is a demonization of one community involved in this. What needs to stop is an absolutely unproven storyline that continues to resurface on the House floor, that this money went to terrorists and it's targeted at one group of our citizens here, of Minnesotans. We'll own that this thing needs to be fixed. We'll own that there were problems in this. We will own that there are fixes, and we think we proposed the right amount, but we're open to that to try and close this. But again, I am not going to allow folks to use this as a hammer against a group of people. And I will remind the legislators who were here with Minlars and the legislators who were here with CCAP, they have been here why this is happening, so they own a little bit of the fix on this to help me move forward. I will set that course. I will take the responsibility. I need their help to make sure I'm successful. So thank you on that on the budget. If there's any other just general.
Shortly after the press conference, Senate Finance Chair Julie Rosen issued the following statement. The effort today is appreciated, but Governor Walz's budget still spends more than we can afford. His dependence on taxing sick people and raising the gas tax is not a sustainable solution. We have a $1 billion surplus. We don't need another $3.5 billion in new taxes and fees. Coming up next is delayed broadcast of last night's conference committee meeting on House File 14, the appropriation of the federal Help America Vote Act money. Here's the House.